Every hit song has one thing in common: crystal clear vocals. But right now your vocal mix might be buried under muddy lows, drowning in reverb, or just not cutting through. So today I'm breaking down exactly how you can mix vocals like a pro. As a producer who's signed to a publisher, I've spent countless sessions with artists who need their vocals to hit hard from the beginning. So stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll have a step-by-step process for pro vocal mixes. Plus I'm going to reveal a simple mixing trick that a Sony mix engineer taught me that changed my mixes forever. So let's dive in, but first, here's the before and after.
When the lights go down and the stars come out, it's not for me to warn you. When the lights go down and the stars come out, it's not for me to warn you. And all the things that you can do.
Okay, so let's break this down. We're going to look at it in 4 different sections. So the first section is going to be the actual plugin chain, so plugin by plugin, and I'll show you exactly what I'm doing and why. Secondly, we'll look at the sends, things like reverbs and other effects to enhance the vocal. In section 3, I'll show you how I use just one plugin to create space for the vocal. And in section 4, I'm going to show you exactly how I edit the audio itself. So I'm going to turn all of these plugins off and we're going to introduce them one by one. And remember, we want to take home the principles of what we're actually applying here. You can really achieve a similar result with anything. Okay, so we've turned all of the plugins off. Starting with plugin number 1, we've got Auto-Tune Access, really basic version of Auto-Tune, but I've used this on records for commercial release and just in demos, so it works really well. I really like it. So before, it sounds like this.
When the lights go down and the stars come out, it's not.
Then on.
When the lights go down and the stars come out, it's not for me to warn you. And
the settings aren't too harsh. I've got both set to medium. You know, really taking advantage of that humanize, I think, can make a big difference, because we want to keep it sort of natural, especially in a track like this. We don't want any kind of sort of heavy tuning. If I were doing something a little heavier, I'd probably pull out something like Melodyne or even Waves Tune, something like that, just to kind of really iron out a lot of those notes. But in this particular track, you know, it sort of works okay just with something basic like this. So next up, we've got sibilance. And basically what this is going to do is just calm some of those S's, some of those plosives and things like that. I think for a plugin like this, and really a bunch of others, it's okay to sort of work from a preset and then just work backwards. So I just kind of played around with the threshold and range, of course using the monitor to your advantage, so you can actually hear what's reacting with the de-esser. Basically, all we're doing again is just ironing out those S's, ironing out a lot of those T's. So here it is without.
When the lights go down and the stars come out, it's not for me to warn you.
This is it with.
When the lights go down and the stars come out.
Now for some people, and even including myself from time to time, that can actually be a little bit much. I had a manager years ago that really just didn't like whenever I'd use a de-esser on something, they just always would want me to pull it back. And I think it's, you know, down to personal preference. Sometimes they can be a little bit strong and really just take those S's out. So you don't want to overdo it here. Just use the threshold to kind of get it to a level you're happy with. So if we were to pull this back, so let's go to a place where there's a few S's. So on the word stars, let's pull it right back.
And the stars come out, it's not for me to want. And the stars come out.
So, you know, it's really suppressing them quite a bit. If we go back down to where it was.
And the stars come out, it's not for me.
Sounds a little bit funny in solo, but I think in the record, when you've got other plugins and effects sort of adding more of that high end, it's good to sort of play it a little bit safe, so it's not accentuating those really, really bright frequencies. So that's, again, personal preference. I like to keep it a little bit down, clamping down some of those S's, and there's some more stuff I'll show you when we move to the manipulating audio section as well. But right after that, we go to our first EQ, and typically with a vocal, I'm not really going to go much past something like 120. But of course, you know, it depends on the vocalist. If you've got, you know, a vocalist with a super low voice, you don't want to be sweeping out that 100. You know, maybe you need to go a little bit further to the left. So in this case, I'd say the vocalist is probably more of an alto. So in that sort of lower range on a female vocal, and I'm just sweeping it to where I need to. I'm not going much further. So have a look at the data here as it plays. I'll play it with the track here.
When the stars come out, it's not for me to warn you. And all the things that you can do.
Okay, so I'm not pulling that high pass filter past any of the data that we're seeing to the right of it, because then that's where you kind of start to get those really nasty frequencies and just sort of unnecessarily pulling out frequencies. You know, I had pulled out a couple here, but then I sort of went back and thought, you know what, that's not making much of a difference. They were a little bit disruptive at the time and I sort of etched them out a little bit, but then I went back and I was like, you know what, it's really not doing a whole heap. So I just left it, because you do want the vocal to actually breathe in its kind of natural state as well. You don't want to manipulate it to the point where it's a totally different vocal, because then that's when you just start to kind of, I think, ruin what the singer has actually brought to the table. I think that's really important, just keeping it somewhat natural where possible. And, you know, maybe if I were to do a proper mix on this, I might sort of start sort of referencing it a little bit harder and kind of etching stuff out. But for now, I just didn't think it needed it. So I just kind of left it a little bit flatter on the higher end. So next we've got the compression. This is the first of 2 compressors we're going to use. Actually, I'm going to say 3. So the first one, I'm just using Pro C2, one of my favorite plugins. I just use the vocal setting here. So I'll just show you without it.
When the stars come out, it's not for me to warn you.
And then with.
When the stars come out, it's not for me to warn you.
So really this first compressor is just for kind of peak control. And as you can see, the attack, so that's at around sort of 5 milliseconds. And that's fast enough just to kind of catch those plosives. So the release I actually have on auto, and that's really cool because it actually adjusts to the dynamics of the actual vocal in real time, which is really useful, especially since you might want sort of faster release during those quick phrases and vice versa, and maybe a longer release on more sustained notes. And, you know, I used to sort of have my release just to the left kind of the whole time, but it really creates a sort of unnecessary pumping effect. You kind of don't need that level of energy throughout the whole track. But I've just found that auto release sits with the track really nicely, and it's subtle, but I think it sort of got the best result for this one. So right after that, I'm going to add CLA2A. This is my second compressor, and I really love the LA2A sound because it just irons out that vocal like no other compressor, I feel. So I highly recommend this. I particularly like it as a second compressor because it just sort of does that cleaning up after the initial sort of peak control. And the really cool thing about the Waves version is you can actually use it to parallel your vocals. I have a different way of paralleling my vocals, but this is a really cool function to have, I think, on any compressor. So really cool using that second layer of compression. First, I'll show you without CLA2A.
When I don't know how, and I'm feeling down, you stand right.
Now with.
When I don't know how, and I'm feeling down, you stand right beside me. Thinking.
So it's really cool when you hear those more sort of sustained notes, you can just hear them kind of leveling out, which I think is really nice. Right after that, we've got a little bit of additive EQ, and what I've done is a very small bell curve around 10K. I heard this from a producer on, I think, Pensado's Place years ago, and he sort of said that he did that on most of his vocal tracks. Can't remember who it was, but it was a really cool interview. So I started trying it on my own vocals, and I just noticed that it really gives you that nice sort of sparkle in that top end. And the cool part about it, because it's a bell curve, you're also getting a little bit of 3, 4, 5K as well. So it's sort of giving you a really nice broad spectrum, but not sort of overdoing every frequency as would, you know, maybe a shelf or something like that. So I love doing that on my vocals. Highly recommend it if you can, as long as your vocals aren't overly top heavy when you record them. Just make sure of that, of course. But yeah, can be a really cool thing to add. So now another plugin that I don't always use, but it sort of always is there to help when I need it. So this is Neutron 4. It's a really cool plugin by Isotope. It actually has some AI functionality. So you can actually hit this button. Basically, it'll sort of run the track through for you, compare it to other instruments within a kind of similar range. It'll actually give it a bit of EQ for you. So as you can see, it does more than EQ. It adds compression, all that sort of stuff. But I'll often just use it if I just want that extra bit of something, or I feel like something's missing. That's usually where I'm going to introduce Neutron 4. So I just sort of hit it, let it do its thing, and it just added this little bit of EQ. I don't think I changed this much at all, except maybe the top end, but I think pretty sure I left that as well. But you know, it reintroduced some of those low mids that maybe I'd cut out either in the master somewhere or, you know, that just weren't sort of coming through. A little bit of low end, things like that. So maybe I'd sort of cut it a little bit too much. It's not something I'm going to sort of swear by in the sense that it's always correct, but it might offer you some ideas that you weren't otherwise aware of. And it can be a really useful thing just to have in your back pocket when you sort of have been listening to something over and over again. You're sort of a little bit lost maybe with how it sounds, maybe a bit of ear fatigue or something. Just sort of gives you a fresh perspective. And I know you've heard this a million times, but do trust your ears. Like, that is important. You can sort of look at what's going on here. It might look really cool, but if what they've done actually makes the track worse, don't just think that, oh, maybe that's how it should sound. Definitely pull it back or just, maybe adjust it to how you want. So without Neutron 4, this is what it sounds like.
When the lights go down and the stars come out, it's not for me to warn you and all the things that you.
And then with.
When the lights go down and the stars come out, it's not for me to warn you.
So it's super subtle, but it's just doing some corrective EQ. So next up, again, one of my favorite plugins, Soothe, which is really great for just sort of taming a lot of that harshness, any of that top end that's kind of in the way. Sometimes you don't even realize certain frequencies are just kind of taking over the mix, but even with a lot of the presets, once again, it just does a really great job of suppressing some of those frequencies that can be pretty bothersome. So I've got this one on vocal D harsh, and as you can see, I was having a bit of an issue with those kind of low mids anyway. So I thought, maybe it's something that Soothe can actually suppress and really just smooth out. So it's doing a really nice job of that, but also again, up around that kind of 2 to 4K where it can get a little piercing for a vocal, it's doing a really nice job of just pulling that back slightly. So I usually like to set the setting to hard, and the depth is up sort of just past halfway. The mix is only 50%, but that's okay because we don't want to destroy it. Soothe is a really great way to actually destroy mixes, so definitely be careful with that and only introduce as needed. So this is it without Soothe, and again, it's going to be really subtle, but I think it's definitely playing a pretty massive part in sort of helping the vocal come across.
When the lights go down and the stars come out, it's not for me to warn you.
Now with.
When the lights go down and the stars come out, it's not for me to warn you and all the things that you can do.
So again, it's suppressing a lot of that high end and a lot of those low mids that we really sort of don't want clogging up the mix. So I've done something pretty unconventional here, and I've actually added another instance of Soothe here. So this song wasn't actually recorded in my studio with sort of my own mic and things. We recorded it at Sony Publishing. So I just found that the mic that we used, I found that there was a lot of top end going on in that vocal, and I just kind of, wanted to just get rid of it a little more. And again, that first Soothe was only at 50% mix, so we weren't doing a whole heap. But in general, I don't typically recommend 2 instances of Soothe in a row. So I've kind of just thrown this on here and just sort of liked what it did. But what we're doing here is focusing on the de-essing. So it's sort of another round of de-essing after the very first round. Again, you don't need to do it twice, but something I just felt it needed. So this is from 3K upwards. As you could see, the last instance was a little lower on the spectrum than that. So yeah, so it's sort of like 5K downwards, sort of overlapping a little bit there, but it seems to be okay for now. I would maybe give that another look just for accuracy. But here we're focusing on those sort of much higher frequencies and just de-essing it slightly. So without, this is what it sounds like.
When the lights go down and the stars come out, it's not.
Now with.
When the lights go down and the stars come out, it's not for me to warn.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I just like that it smooths it out. I know the S's might sound a little bit different, but I really don't like those really present kind of S sounds. I really prefer just cleaning it right up. Again, a personal preference, but yeah, it seemed to work okay here. So lastly, on this chain, as you can see, I know we've got a lot of plugins here, but they're all kind of playing a small role in kind of making this vocal what it is. We don't sort of have one plugin doing 4 things at a time, which is probably why there's a few going on here. So lastly, I've got Vocal Writer. And basically, I've added a bit of volume because we recorded this a little bit lower than usual for this particular demo, but probably get a slightly better level next time. So I bumped it up a little bit in volume from the plugin, which I don't typically do, but there were no real issues. So we've got Vocal Writer, and I sort of use it in a slightly unconventional way. A lot of the presets will have kind of a range of 6 to 10 dB, maybe even more, and it just kind of rides it up and down. I may be using this plugin completely wrong, but I just kind of like to clamp it down and have everything just kind of as leveled as I can, at least for something on the poppier side. I just find that it levels it out, it brings all of those soft bits up. Yes, it's similar to a compressor, but obviously we're not using compression for that purpose as such. We're using volume, which has been automated. Now, sometimes this won't do the trick, and I'll actually just kind of bypass it altogether and just go in and manually draw in the volume. It's a little bit old school, but I just really find that it works. It's still something that works really well, and you can ensure that you're going to get the result that you want that way. So that's something to consider if this doesn't quite hit, but it's a bit of a fun plugin for me. I just kind of put it on, let it even everything out, and it just kind of, gives it that extra, that last bit that it needs. So This is without it, just really quickly.
When the lights go down and the stars come out.
And before I play it with it on, note that a few dB is going to be volume.
When the lights go down and the stars come out, it's not for me to warn you and all the things that you can do.
So if you listen to all of the syllables, all of the mouth sounds and things like that, they're a little bit closer together in volume, and you can just hear everything as if they're kind of talking in front of you. That's really the goal here. So that's the entire plugin chain, and what we're going to move to next are the sends. And I've got about 4 kind of main sends that I'm using here and that I'll use on just about any vocals. So if you have a look here, the first one is parallel compression, and I've just gradually eased that in. So if we go without that, this is what it's doing.
When the lights go down and the stars come out, it's not.
And then with.
When the lights go down and the stars come out, it's not for me to warn you.
So to me, that's just really adding a little bit of body. I could have gone a little bit more, and honestly, in something like a bigger chorus, I probably would. But for here, it didn't really need much. I didn't want the vocal to be too kind of in your face. I kind of wanted that ethereal, lush sound. So I didn't overdo it too much with that, but these are kind of your basic settings I find for vocal. I've probably overdone the threshold and the ratio a little bit, but again, I just kind of like the sound a little more. Be careful. The only tip I'd say is first level match. Make sure that, you know, you're not just adding volume. I actually used to do that a lot, but you've got to realize that volume is always going to sound good. So just really make sure you're level matching that by soloing the actual send. Too far to the left, too quick an attack time, you'll start to hear all sorts of artifacts and distortion. So you really don't want that. So I've found that around here is really good. But again, play around with your track, make sure that it works for that. So the second send that I'm using is a delay. And this is my favorite delay to use. This is H delay by Waves. My mentor used it years ago when I used to mentor at a studio, and I pretty much picked it up from him, from Michael, and yeah, haven't really looked back, pretty much used it every day since. So big fan of this one. It's an old classic, but it just works so well. And basically what I'm using here is a dotted eighth delay. It's not as exciting in this particular track because the rhythms don't really lend themselves well to kind of different spins and things like that on this particular track. But you can, of course, and I've just etched in a couple, you can really play around with different words and really accentuate different words with delay. And you can do the same with reverb too. But just as far as delay goes, this is what it sounds like first up.
When the lights go down and the stars come out, it's not for me to want.
So this is without.
When the lights go down and the stars come out, it's not for me to want.
So to me, this section even sounds a little bit better without delay. But if we have a look with it, you'll see the sort of ambience that it's adding.
When the lights go down and the stars come out, it's not for me to warn you and all the things that you.
And you don't even realize that it's there first up until you take it away. So that's always a good sign, I think, with just effects in general. You want to sort of have to listen for them. If they're too in your face, or if it's like very obvious that a delay is going on, I think it kind of just clouds the mix up a little bit, distracts the listener from that melody. So personally, that's how I like to treat delay. And as you can see, I've just drawn in some very sort of subtle spins here. So basically a spin is just if on a certain word, you just want to lift the volume of the delay so it's accentuated a little bit more. And if you have a look here, this is what it's doing.
When the lights go down.
You can hear on down, you can sort of hear it a little bit more in the background. But again, I think a song with a different tempo, slightly different melody would lend itself better to, maybe more of a crotchet delay or something like that. So moving on to reverb, I tried a couple of different reverbs with this one. I tried Pro R, but then came back to another one of my favorite by Waves, which is H delay. So it's another one in the H series, and I think it's a really underrated reverb. It just has so many capabilities, great presets, and just an overall great sound. I find it to be really, really nice. So definitely check this one out if you can. But I'm using the Greg Wells preset here, vocal reverb of goodness. All I've done to change it is pretty much add that reverb time up 6. And I've also changed the dynamics to duck. So this is a really cool technique you can use in general when using sort of longer reverbs. And that's basically ducking it every time the vocal hits. This plugin does it more or less automatically. Just you have to sort of adjust the thresh and recovery. But it's a really, really nice way to kind of have a longer, more lush reverb while still maintaining a cleaner vocal. So big fan of this plugin overall. And this is what it sounds like. I'll show you in solo what the reverb actually sounds like. So it's super warm, super lush, really big fan of this one. This is what it sounds like in the mix. I'll actually show you without it in the mix first.
The lights go down and the stars come out. It's not for me to warn you. And all the
And then with.
lights go down and the stars come out. It's not for me to warn you.
So as you can hear, it's still sitting underneath. It's not sort of taking over the whole vocal. I think earlier in this mix it was a little bit, but I just kind of lowered it until it was at a level where I sort of had to listen to it, but I would still miss it if it was taken away. So that's generally how I use reverb. The only other thing I would definitely consider, I didn't do it with this particular preset as much, but I'm normally pretty big on pre-delay. So this pre-delay is set to 89, but often you can set it to something like sync, and you can actually set it to, a 30-second note, a 16th, anything like that. And it'll sort of create this initial gap between the vocal and the reverb. And it's a really nice thing because it actually keeps the vocal really nice and clean, allows it to stand out, but then it surrounds it with the reverb sort of after the fact. So it's a really cool technique. And I would say sort of 99% of the time, try and have some kind of pre-delay setting for your reverbs. It'll make all the difference and make them a bunch cleaner. The very last send that I'll use the majority of the time is actually a small room reverb. And this can do wonders for a vocal, particularly in a very dense mix. I didn't need to sort of blend it in so much here, and you probably won't even notice the difference. But the idea is that you're creating sort of a space and kind of, I guess, underlying width for the vocal. It's a really nice technique. I would definitely use it, especially if you got, a big mix. I think rap vocals could benefit from it as well. You could definitely use it on pop music in general. I think works really well. But really anything that just sort of needs to have a kind of sense of space or kind of have some kind of a surrounding, I think it works really nicely. So it's not something that you're supposed to notice a whole heap like the long tail reverb. But again, if it's not there, you'll definitely notice. It just adds dimension to it. So if we have a look without it, this is what it sounds like. And then I'm going to over exaggerate it. So this is without.
And the lights go down and the stars come out. It's not for me to.
And then with.
Go down and the stars come
so not very noticeable, but if I pump this up a little bit just so you can hear what it's doing.
And the lights go down and the stars come out. It's not for me to warn you.
And you just want to kind of blend that in.
And all the things that you can do when I don't know.
In general, that's going to make a massive difference on your vocal mixes. So moving to section 3, I just want to talk about one single plugin, which is called Track Spacer. You may already have it. You may have already heard of it. It's just, again, it's an older plugin, but just does a fantastic job. So what we're going to do is basically place that on the instrument that it's kind of clashing with the most. Now, I've got this on a couple of separate instruments, but in most cases, I'm going to group the instruments and have it on just that one bus. But this is a bit of a unique situation for some reason. So I'm just going to show you what I did for it on these plucks. So it's just on the separate track. I've set the vocal as the sidechain. And basically, I've just lifted this up, the ratio, until it ducks enough of that instrument to not clash with the vocal and without getting rid of it completely. So if we have a look here.
And the lights go down.
So that completely eliminates it.
Out, it's not for me to warn you.
So when the vocal's playing, you just want to be able to hear the instrument and the vocal, but without them sort of clashing. So we'll keep going back until we hear it.
And the lights go down.
Yeah, and I think that's about where we had it.
Come out, it's not for me to warn
and then it'll kind of lift back up whenever the vocal stops. So really cool plugin for that. And it works for a bunch of other things as well. But for vocals in particular, Trackspace is definitely worth getting. So lastly, I want to walk through the audio editing and how I actually manipulated that before any of the plugins or before sort of adding effects and things like that. So the very first thing I'm going to do with almost any vocal is cut out the breaths. And as you can see, I've cut them out, just added very small fades here. So super basic. I don't use a plugin to kind of eliminate all the breaths because I just think that it's a bit cleaner if you can do it yourself. So I'll always take care of that almost immediately. Sometimes even just after the vocalist has recorded it in and I'm in the session, I'll get rid of some breaths because it just, really cleans up the mix, a surprising amount. And when I started doing that, I remember years ago before I'd done it, everything just sounded kind of really messy. But as soon as I started doing that, it just really cleaned up my tracks. So if you're not eliminating breaths already, I highly recommend it. And lastly, what I want to talk about, the mix engineer that I spoke to at Sony, I was at Sony Australia years ago. I was actually signed there as an artist and he was sort of working on a track with us, really cool producer. And one thing that I noticed that he was really serious about was just sort of eliminating S's and T's and things like that, but not through a de-esser. He would actually go through and individually isolate S's, T's, P's, things like that, and decrease the volume. So ever since he told me that, I've pretty much done it. And of course you can still add a de-esser or something like that. But when you do this, the de-esser doesn't have to work as hard. It doesn't have to compress those things as much. So I really recommend doing this. And also what I think makes a mix sound a little more undercooked in general are those really harsh T's and S's. And what you'll notice when you start to eliminate those, not completely, just a little bit, just decreasing the dB by, you know, maybe 3 to 5 or something like that, whatever works for your track, you'll start to notice that your vocal overall is a lot cleaner. It'll just sit nicer on the ear. It'll be a little bit easier to listen to, because I think what we don't realize is when with our own vocals, if we've recorded something poorly, or, you know, we just have something that's sort of really harsh, we just kind of get sick of it and think, oh, it's not good. But often it's just a matter of, well, A, recording it, you know, as well as possible, but second to that is controlling a lot of those things sort of while manipulating the audio. So as you can see, I've got all of these different cuts, but they aren't spaces. They're little either fades, or I've gone in, let's see another one, or I've gone in and just like lowered the volume of certain things like this here. You know, that would be, let's see what it is.
Stand right beside me.
So I think that's the S of stand. So lowering that, you know, it just makes it less harsh and just an overall better listen. And so with those 4 sections, aside from actually recording something really well, you'll have a process in place for mixing your next vocal to a pro level. Thanks for watching. And if you want me to personally coach you so you can finally get your music to a professional level, just hit the link below and book a call. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.